Well, we're talking about the different priorities of tzedakah, and we're on the bottom of the page, the four pages, the four one of the pages of the four quarters. I should have numbered the pages, and it's on 112 of the book which we're learning from, communal contributions. Um, so there's a clear division of opinion among authorities in regard to use of Meiser money for the payment of contributions to the synagogue and for other communal needs. So, so this is obviously a very important question. When you don't use donations to a shul, can that come from Meiser money or not? So those who do not permit such a use base themselves on the Mario quote in number 2 above, that whenever you have something which is an obligation upon you, you can't use Meiser money for it. And then he brings down that it's from the Mata Moshe that there was a minute to pay the Chazan Purim money. Pay the Chazan Purim money. Pay the Chazan money on Purim, and this payment is part of the salary of the Chazan. It's not tzedakah, and therefore you can't take it from Meiser money. And the Shla accepts that, and the Knesset Gedolah accepts it, and the extrapolate from this that you can't use it to pay any communal obligation. You look at the third column, 114, it says, following this approach, Rabbi Yehuda Assad, this approved they're using Meiser money to pay communal dues or for a new seat in a new synagogue, or to contribute towards the deficit on a new building. Rabbi David Tzvi Hoffman ruled similarly. Rabbi Seligman Ber Bamberger was asked about a levy for a building fund on wealthy members of the community. Could they deduct the amount from which they subsidize poor members of the community from Meiser funds? He said no. Okay, because it's interesting why. This rule is such a deduction since there was no direct levy on poor members of the community which the Meiser money would defray. In other words, you could say that, okay, I'm giving Meiser money instead of what the Aniyim would have to pay. But he said the Aniyim were putter anyway. So it's the Aniyim were putter anyway, so therefore you're not doing any good by doing that. Now, that would be bad if those are the only poskim who spoke. But on the contrary, there are many other poskim who say differently. And here from the Pnei Yeshua in 114, may Meiser money be used to pay the salary of the president of the communal mitzvah? And the Pnei Yeshua says, yes. Says in the Beis HaMikdash, to bring a korban, you can't bring it for something which is already devoted for some other purpose, right? But outside the Beis HaMikdash, when there's no concept of bringing a korban, so then you can use that for another purpose as well. In other words, you can take Meiser money, which is just a minhag, and use it in order to cover any legitimate expenses, which are going to be of communal use. So at the bottom says Shlomo Zalman says that it's always best to specify before you start taking off Meiser, or when you become aware of the Chiyuv Meiser, that you're going to use it to also meet your obligations in shul. So if you get an aliyah in shul, and you just learned this halacha, which we know today, so that there are people are lenient because it's not even the rabbanon, it's a minhag. So you can use your Meiser money to pay for the aliyah. Okay? Many going to communal obligations can be used for aliyah. Again, many persons disagree. They say something you obligate yourself to do, you can't use Meiser money. But since it's a machlokes, it's not even the rabbanon, it's a minhag. So therefore, you can say, this is the way I'm makabel the minhag on myself.
And easy, you always obligate, but when you pay Meiser, you're obligating yourself when you pay it.
Right, so the assumption of the other person is that you obligate yourself to give Meiser to a voluntary cause. In other words, Meiser by definition, they were saying, what?
The shul also is a voluntary cause.
Not if you have dues, it's not a voluntary cause.
First of all, if no one's kicked out, they don't pay membership. It's not easier to collect money if you did, but people aren't kicked out if they don't pay membership. So
that's where you go.
No, so everything's voluntary. Right? Even if someone has an aliyah and they give money after their aliyah, no one's forcing them to do it. They're obligated.
Also, most people in mind, they're making or paying for giving a mishabeh or any of that type of stuff. Most people are having in mind that they're going to use their Meiser money for that aliyah, for purchasing, even when they're bidding on something. Most people have in mind that they're going to use it.
That's fine. Again, if you're
right, but that's what I'm saying. That's how you take away that obligation. Now, it's not an obligation because I bought that aliyah knowing I'm using
right.
it.
Otherwise, you wouldn't give any money, but because you
right.
Okay, but that we're talking about here more things where there's a set price, like a seat in the shul, right? So a seat in the shul, presumably in the old days, to part of a kilo, you had to pay. But nowadays we have lots of deadbeats. But now back then, people they're expecting you to pay your membership. So, okay, and then we said education.
Even if people are quote unquote required to pay, right? They say the membership per year, but no one's thrown out for not paying. Is that an obligation or does that become voluntary?
I think it's an obligation some people don't meet.
It's like the guy borrows money and doesn't pay back.
Yeah.
Nowadays it's almost like a voluntary.
I think it's still an obligation. He's not meeting it. It's an obligation.
Who decides on the obligation? Like who decides?
So that's what he's saying. Again, you can decide when you give Meiser money. I'm going to give Meiser money to community obligation.
You're to be a member of the shul, but if you want to have membership rights, you want to be able to vote on stuff or have a set seat, then you pay. That's not an obligation.
When there was one kehila, right? Everybody was a member of the kehila, then it was an obligation. Okay, today it's voluntary association. Is that what you're saying? Because it's voluntary association?
Yeah, right. No one's forcing anybody to be a member of any shul.
Okay, so it was today when we don't really have a kehila, so I would say probably you're right. Because now it's anything, Isha Yosh Bein Abiyasa, so therefore it's voluntary.
I mean, similar to tuition, right?
Well, let's get to tuition. Okay, so that's flipping the page here. So it's 116. So it says here, it brings down from the Chavetz Chaim, Avas Chesed. L'shalim limos meiser schar limud lebanav asul chiyama. Say mitzvah shemuchiyav be'atzmo milami lebanav alischolem milamed ve'en lifro chovo limos meiser. So Chavetz Chaim says you can't pay because with most meiser your tuition because you're obligated to pay tuition because you have to teach your kids Torah. So you have to spend your own money on it. You can't spend meiser money on it. Meiser money is not really yours. So therefore, you have to spend your own money on it. So he brings down that the Tzitz Eliezer, Leslie Rosenberg, relaxes the condition of a person in financial difficulties, particularly if the teacher is a poor man. So either one is in financial difficulties, right? The giver or the recipient. And of course, you can use money to pay for other children. If you take a look at the end of the next paragraph, where Moshe Feinstein and Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach say that a portion of school fees which can be attributed to the education of non-fee paying children may be taken from Meiser. Now, I don't know how you figure this out. How much of your tuition you're paying.
Annual school budget divided by the number of kids in the school. That's what I should pay. If I'm paying more than that, then it's going to offset somebody else.
But don't schools usually run a deficit?
You run a deficit, but you know what their budget is. If their budget, for example, the school has 2,000 kids and a budget of $20 million, $10,000 a kid, right? Now, if most people are paying less, so they're running a deficit, but if they're charging tuition of $12,000, then $2,000 is
then $2,000 for sure.
They may not be collecting that from anybody, but people who are paying that amount.
Yeah. Now, there in the next paragraph, he says that Moshe was asked to Shiloh, maybe use some money for Beis Yaakov schools because no obligation to teach Torah to girls.
Then why is it a Meister? Why is it eligible?
No, it's still a good use of the money. It's still a good use of the money to teach them, but it's not a chiyuv. The whole point is not to use some money for something you're mechuyev to do. But it says you're not mechuyev to teach girls Torah, so maybe that's considered to be a good use of Meiser. So Moshe rejected that. He said, he says in the USA there's a state obligation to send girls to school. If they were not sent to Beis Yaakov, they would have to attend a secular school with no Torah or religious instruction. Because this situation becomes obligatory to send girls to Jewish schools. B, even though there's no obligation to teach Torah to girls, it's an obligation to instruct them in Jewish belief and practice. Okay, so that well, it's not going to help us, right? So that, but then afterwards he says, for Torah education of older children, a more lenient view has been taken for someone in financial difficulties. Because you only have to teach your kids Chumash, right? The basics, till a certain age. So what if they're, here's asked, Rabbi Petterberg was asked, what if the kid is 15? can you take from the Meiser money? So he says, I'm going to just read the English in the italics. He says, after it's become clear that a person may support children above the age of 6 for Meiser, which you saw last week, we can deduce a fortiori kavachomer and use Meiser money to pay for the tuition of his 15-year-old son. For he is obliged only to pay the fees for the tuition for the written Torah. You know that? You only clear to pay to teach your son Torah Shebiksav. Torah Shebal Peh, the teacher's supposed to teach for free. So therefore, you don't have to pay him for it. So that's the case. He's saying, if you need to pay somebody to teach your kid Torah Shebal Peh out of the goodness of your heart, so then you can take it for the Meiser money. Because that's not an obligation. As it says, but not in Mishnah, as the you are there. Meiser money may certainly be used to pay for the Torah education of poor children. This is the most important fulfillment of the mitzvah. That's the best way to use your Meiser. This follows that in our case, Meiser may be used to pay for the son's tuition in Mishnah Gemara since the father is in financial trouble. Might be argued that whenever possible, it is also mitzvah for a father to teach his son Mishnah Gemara, Halach, and Haggadah. And since it's not legally enforceable, it is not an obligation, but a mitzvah. And Meiser money can be used for the mitzvah. So, he said, and then he goes on to say, this certainly applies. It applies even to money you already took off from Meiser, without making it tonight. It says certainly if you're planning a future Meiser, you can make it tonight and say that any tuition above the age which you're teaching them basic chumash, it comes from Meiser money. Okay. Now, the question is by limudei chol, obviously, because limudei chol, a person is required to teach his son an umnus. Right, he's supposed to teach his son a craft. But I don't think limudei chol actually is teaching him a craft. Because almost all limudei chol is basically useless when it comes to a craft. You have to get either specialized instruction or just go by your wits. But so therefore, if we hold it's a good thing for kids to go to school for whatever reason, so therefore you should be allowed to do that as well.
Is he given end age for this? He says 15 is okay. So what point is the cutoff?
Why should there be a cutoff?
Same.
No, if you're sending a kid to yeshiva, you can take off the whole...
thing. So when he's 18, when he's going there to shul, and then when he's sitting and learning in kol afterwards too.
Yeah.
That's all can officially be considered from your
Yeah. From the goodness of your heart. Yeah. Okay. So he says that, look at the next paragraph. Moshe Feinstein was prepared to go further in the case of two brothers wishing to use their Meiser money to the support of a third brother who devoted himself purely to Torah study for some years after his marriage. Right? Feinstein allowed the two brothers to start putting aside a proportion of their Meiser money for this purpose a year or two before the proposed marriage date, so a suitable sum could be assembled. He insists, however, that they should pass the money to the third brother as soon as they had separated their Meiser, at least deposit in a special account in the bank. Otherwise, they would not have fulfilled their current charitable obligations. To give it as soon as possible to the jurisdiction of the brother. He also emphasized that they must use the rest of their Meiser money for ordinary charities. Okay, I don't think that, although that's what he said, I don't think it's ma'akev. You can use your Meiser money for anything you want. It's just we say the best use of it is tzedakah. So certainly if it is if it's a worthy cause like supporting somebody in Torah who wants to learn Torah, so then that is a legitimate use of Meiser money. Okay, now number 5. If a person has no Meiser funds available and wishes to contribute to charity, is he allowed to separate Meiser in advance for anticipated earnings? Can I borrow from next year's Meiser to give now to a cause which I need to give to? So this question was considered by the Maharil. It says, even though such a procedure cannot be filed for agricultural Meiser, obviously you can't take up Meiser from next year's crop on this year's crop. It's the Davish Labolam. He says for Meiser Kesafim it can be used. Okay, so he says it says like a machzis a shekel, which you can set aside in advance. So here too you can set it aside from advance. Now there's an interesting question. Next paragraph. May a person use this procedure retrospectively? In other words, separate Meiser Kesafim and retain for himself to cover a loan which he has already given to a poor man. In other words, I loan somebody. I'm never going to get the money back. I know that, right? And he's poor. The reason I'm paying is not because he's a bad person, but he's a poor person. So can I decide I'll use my Meiser money to cover his debt to me? And he'll work off his debt on my Meiser money. Okay, at the bottom he says on page 120, one who's separating Meiser Kesafim and has, this is from the Ramah, the one who's separating Meiser Kesafim has loaned some of his own money to a poor man. Now, as advanced to a poor man a certain sum against future charity payments of Meiser, may separate a sum equal to loan and keep for himself. This position may be adopted only if the poor man is still alive when the Meiser is separated. But if he has died, or circumstances have improved, there is no obligation on him or his heirs to repay the loan, as for when the loan was given. I guess I'm not sure what he means by that. Of course, there's an obligation, but one may not retain the Meiser since it cannot be used to cover a loss. So I guess if he defaulted, he went bankrupt, and he wrote off the loan, right? That's what I think he's saying. You wrote off the loan already. You can't say, "Oh, I wrote it off, but now let me take it for Meiser money." So if it's still outstanding, and the guy is poor and he's still alive, you can use it to pay back his debt which he owes you.
If he ever eventually pays that, he has to go back to Meiser.
Right, has to go back. Yeah, right.
If you have a separate account for Meiser money, could you loan money from that account?
What?
Is that the same thing to poor people?
Well, yeah, that's Gemach is a good use of Meiser money.
Why not anybody? Why can't you loan if you're loaning it? So who cares if it's poor or rich? So you're loaning the person's going to pay you back. It's supposed to pay you back.
Yeah, but the question, it has to be since but it has to be used for a purpose of mitzvah.
The guy needs the money.
Okay, so
he's gonna need them. He's not.
I guess the point you're making, which is a legitimate point, is that nobody goes to Gemach unless they need the Gemach.
Right. Even a Gemach, no one's borrowing money unless they need to borrow money.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
No, yeah, people doing a new, new construction on their house.
Okay.
Not that they need.
They still need the money. They don't have it now.
Their need is different than other people's need.
Right, but
I know a lot of people who have a lot of money that they could access. They don't want to sell their stocks. They don't want to liquidate something.
Again,
it's not a need. It's a what? I mean.
Again, the fact is that he needs it now for whatever reason, whatever.
In his mind, he needs it. He doesn't need it. And he has it. He has access to it.
He's paying it back.
Do you use a Gemach instead of a bank for a mortgage?
What?
I'm saying so it would be.
Yes.
To what end? You using a Gemach as a bank?
Kind of.
For mortgage, I'm saying like,
I don't want to pay interest on that. You took him out to buy my house.
So
half the time.
So look at on page 121. The Chafetz Chaim emphasizes the importance of establishing a loan fund for the poor in order to fulfill mitzvah of a strengthening hand for one who's faltering. He recommends using initially 2/3 of one Meiser money for actual gift and 1/3 for lending to those in need until the loan fund has become established. Blinei declaration may be made before separation of Meiser to comply with authorities who do not consider loans to be within the framework of charity. So evidently it's a machlokes whether loaning money is a good use for Meiser. And therefore, he says you should make it tonight when you set aside your Meiser that it's going to be used for loans. I'll tell you what the issue with loans is because Meiser money is not really supposed to be used. It's not really yours.
Exactly. A loan is a loan. A loan is not giving Meiser to somebody.
No, I'm saying but saying a Gemach also. How can the Meiser? I guess you could say the Meiser is its own Gemach because it's not. Even though you said it's like its own foundation.
That's how most people do it.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, I think that's okay. I think he's here talking about personal loans. But the issue is personal loans, not
right.
Yeah. Okay, let's skip now to payment of Meiser in non-monetary manner. Okay, so though Meiser is usually given in money, can also be paid in kind, the object of commercial value. A trader might pay his Meiser with the object of his trade. A jeweler might pay his Meiser with jewelry. Right, so the question arises: the value to be placed in jewelry given. For example, he may have a brooch for sale at £100, which costs him £90. If he gives them for Meiser, is the value taken as £100 or £90? Good question, right? Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says that the sale price may be used, but he must remember to include the £10 profit in his Meiser accounting. But he has to take Meiser off that £10. If he has no overhead expenses, he can value the Meiser contribution at the cost of the goods, £90, with 9/10 of the expected profits, 9 pounds, giving a total of Meiser payment of 99 pounds. So that would be in the case of the 100-pound donation. I think that which retails at 100 pounds. Now this is much more complicated though. Professional services. In other words, somebody wants to give his he's a carpenter and he wants to build shelves for the shul. And so saying I would charge X amount of money to build shelves. So that instead I'm building the shelves for the shul. So that's my meiser. So because does that work?
I mean, you could ask our president. I mean, would that work if someone makes a payment instead of if you have membership for $700 and someone says I'll build shelves?
When we did the shul, we bartered with people who were doing other things with the shul. Flooring, someone did something that, again, if we were charging membership at the time, we built this, we had $1,500 a family, right, to cover it. So people did things that were worth that instead of giving the cash. So, why not?
Right, so that's what he says. He says it's okay.
And we weren't discussing Meiser, we discussed what the shul was able to agree to. There's nothing to do with Meiser, not Meiser.
No, I'm just curious.
So he says, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says, there's a legitimate providing members to include the fee is Meiser accounting, which is very similar to what we just saw. If he has no overhead expenses, he may deduct 9/10 of his professional fee. For example, a member of a profession with an income of £2,700 could do professional work, which he would have received a fee of £300, and would then have fully discharged his Meiser obligations. Why? Because that's 10 nights of 270. It's complicated, but the point is that has to be that it's going to he's going to cover. He's going to Meiser on the profit he would have gotten as well. So it can't. He's going to count 300 pounds, 270 or 300 pounds, because 30 of the pounds
of his. Count it as 3,000 basically.
What?
You have to count it as 3,000.
3,000 exactly. Yeah.
It's as if he sold it to somebody else, and then he had to pay Meiser on that.
Right. Okay, so then he says, but a very important point, care should be taken to differentiate between personal services and professional services. So, there's halacha, if I go to a doctor and I say, ask the doctor for advice on the street, he can charge me for it. If I go for medical advice. If I go to a lawyer and ask him for legal advice, he can charge me for it. Right?
Oh, he will.
Doctors might not, lawyers will, yeah.
Right. So what if he doesn't charge you? Can he deduct that from his meiser? The fact that you had a schmooze in the street about a legal issue and he didn't charge you for it, right? Right? So
what he uses as a tax write-off.
So basically that's what he says. He says it depends if he was doing as would have done as a chesed or not. In other words, if I would have done it anyway as a chesed, I can't say, because I have a meiser obligation, so I'll use it to meet my meiser obligation, right? But if he wouldn't have done it as a chesed, then in a chanami you can deduct it.
Does that only apply if it's a poor person?
Yeah, it has to be.
If he did that for a rich guy, so I'm not charging you. My neighbor, I'm not charging you.
Right, if the guy can afford to pay for it, right, it's not going to. But who can afford lawyers? So
people cut out.
Obviously, somebody does.
Question: if he does it on Shabbos or not?
What?
You can't charge anyway.
Question is, can they take out the
He's not charging for talking to you on Shabbos. He's charging for the preparation to talk to you on Shabbos. So
can you take out the money from the gemach to pay the lawyer?
What?
Can you take out the money from the gemach to pay
Sure,
the lawyer?
why not? It has to pay it back. And that's what brings down the source over here. For example, the Gemara tells us in Ksuvas of a case where a wealthy person became impoverished, and Hill bought him a horse and a servant to run before it. On one occasion, when the service was not available, Hill ran before it himself. This is not a professional service, but an act of chesed. So to hire the horse, and the guy to run in front of the horse, that he can do from Meister money, from Tzedakah money too. But if you did it, you can't consider that to be deductible because you were doing it as a chesed. Okay, so now the rewards for charity and Meiser, testing the Almighty.
This is a big one.
Yeah. So I'm not sure. Actually, I didn't actually include this.
I want my money back.
We'll do it next. We'll do it next time. So in the meantime, we still have a bunch of tshuvas from Shlomo Zalman, which are fascinating tshuvas. Okay, and that's on the last page. First he asked the Sheila Gimel. I don't know what happened first to Shilas, how they got cut off. But Sheila Gimel says if the value of merchandise goes up or down by inflation, or by inflation, that much goes by inflation, or the private money was, what's the word, when money's depreciated? Is that the word? No.
Deflation.
No, but when they make money not buy as much.
Devalue.
What? Devalue, right. Money's devalued. So you have to take Meiser on this additional amount, and he says, does Mistab or not? Do you know that I saw today, say, I was having schmoozing with my Harusa about, because we talk about, I don't remember exactly what got this, so I looked up 1,000 big bills that the United States government used to issue. And they used to issue $1,000 bills, $5,000 bills. $10,000. There was a $100,000 bill, which was not legal tender. But if you have a $10,000 bill from back when they used to issue it, it's legal tender. So, but a $1,000 bill in what was $1,000? It's $1,000 today is worth $130 in 1969. Because when $1,000 will buy you today, $130 could have bought you in 1969. It's incredible how. So all that going up in price, which has taken place since then, it's really treading water.
Inflation.
What? Yeah. So inflation. Yeah. So okay. So
Nowadays, sorry to interrupt.
No.
Are you able to, you know, like the famous line, you give a guy a fish, he eats for a meal. You teach him how to fish, he eats for life.
Yeah.
So based on that concept, could you give someone who's poor, could you pay for his secular studies?
for sure, for a second study, which is practical, not for the study great literature.
Right, exactly. Not the BS in art. Right.
Yeah.
I'm saying like a legit. I mean, maybe he talk a cook.
You could
Because
pay for
that's how
medical
you
school, but
start.
you might not get a return on that
Yeah.
investment anymore.
We had a guy who used to be in our company who used to be knocking door to door collecting money. He knocked on my boss's door. My boss said to him, if I give you $1, you're still going to be knocking on somebody else's door tomorrow. He goes, yeah. He goes, how about I give you a job instead? Yeah, I worked in the company for like 15 years.
Okay.
Could he use his mice money for that?
Paying the guy from then on.
Yeah.
Maybe for the first month while he trained him, maybe, but after
At
that.
some point, the guy's an employee and he's producing. You know, you can't just.
Right, it's not productive problem.
Field
If he's not
electrician?
productive, he's doing a
Field
professional problem.
electrician? So like, at what point is he considered? Is it like once he's past apprentice, journeyman? What point do you?
Probably whatever you would do for a regular employee.
Well,
Normally,
yeah.
you would.
Whatever the standard is.
Yeah, normally if a guy has to be somewhat of an electrician, let's say, right, and you still train him for 2 weeks. Well, in 2 weeks, you can't.
Apprenticeship is a lot longer.
I don't know, I think-
I know, that's what you do for other people. And
Most guys
would you hire people straight out of school?
don't
Or?
Why
know what
can't,
they're
yeah,
doing.
but why
Why
can't you
just
say
like-
why can't you say that every single person that I'm supporting in my company is a chesed? Because if they weren't working for me, they would not be able to afford the lifestyle.
And neither would you. Because
Exactly.
you wouldn't have any big company.
100%.
Because they're making you.
100%. But why can't they use my mice money to pay them, to pay my workers?
Because you owe them a salary. It's an obligation. You can't pay obligations with mice money. Okay, I think we'll stop here for the day and come back to this next week, and we'll come eventually to the testing of Kodesh Baruch Hu. Okay?
That's what everybody wants.
I
to
know.
hear.
We'll get there.
You should clap on the bima before we have it before that Tuesday.
Okay, fine. Okay, we'll do.
I have an interesting question now. Made me think of it because we were talking about bartering.
Should I record it? It's a good question.
You can start recording again if you think it was a good question.